See, the cross of Christ is all about justice meeting love, where justice is God's ultimate. There has to be a payment for our sin. And that payment is based on justice. It's all about justice. But then there's also love, because it's Christ sacrificing his life for our sins to make that type of payment.
Can you explain how we as Christians can defend against the argument that the Bible may have been changed over the course of history to perpetuate like an agenda by the church?
Sure. The Greek New Testament that we have today in English is based on over 5,800 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript dated from the 2nd to the 10th century AD, all agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. Now, are there manuscript variants? Yes, there are. But those variants are so small, like, is the word singular or plural? Is it a definite or an indefinite article? There is nothing that is changed by those variants. Now watch out. Bart Ehrman is head of the religion department at UNC Chapel Hill, where we will be in a few weeks. And he wrote a book that was a bestseller. And in this book, he writes, there are between 200 and 400,000 manuscript variants, differences in those Greek manuscripts. 200 to 400,000. So how can you have any degree of certainty that you have an accurate book? Well, what is also true is those 200 to 400,000 manuscript variants are located in 25,000 manuscripts, which means you have 8 to 16 manuscript variants per manuscript. We have an incredibly high degree of certainty that we really have what those eyewitnesses wrote. The idea that the Council of Nicaea put together the New Testament is false. The way you know that is by reading the early church fathers, who begin to list the Gospels and also other of Paul's writings. Now, was there some debate about the authenticity of a book like Hebrews, or 2nd and 3rd John, or 2nd Peter? Yes, there was. Did that debate go on into the 2nd century and 3rd century? Yes, it did. But it was not the church that got a council together and pulled a power move and decided, we're just going to reject the Gnostic Gospels because we don't like them. Baloney. The tests that the church used to determine what was going to be in the New Testament, what are the 27 books of the New Testament? The tests were really simple. Was it written by an eyewitness or by somebody who knew an eyewitness, like Luke and obviously Paul? And secondly, was it accepted by the worldwide church around the Mediterranean? If the book was simply accepted in Alexandria, Egypt, but not in Antioch or not in Rome, it was not accepted as part of the Canon, the New Testament. It had to have universal acceptance, and it had to be written by an eyewitness or by someone who knew an eyewitness. And then thirdly, it had to hold to the Orthodox Christian faith. And that is why the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Pontius Pilate, which are Gnostic Gospels, which means they're based on Gnostic philosophy, were excluded.
So there are many different non-Christians, so enemies of the Christian faith, who actually talked about your great question within the first 90 years after Christ, even closer. I'll give you three. Tacitus, who's a governor, Roman governor, Pliny the Younger, and Josephus. Okay, they despised anything Christ-related. And yet, very early on, they talked about how, just like the book of Acts backs up, Christians were given the name Christians by pagans. They hated Christianity. Women, for example, Josephus talked about, were the first ones to the tomb after Jesus rose from the dead, and so everyone should discount their testimony. So you get the entire Christian story, the majors, from these non-Christian authors who hated Christ, all within the first 90 years after his death, one. And then two, basically similar to his point, is you had the preaching of this early happening, which was who Jesus was, but especially his resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8. So who he was, how he died, rose from the dead, who were the eyewitnesses, that spread throughout the known empire within weeks, crucial, after the resurrection. So nobody could have made this power move where they said, we got it, people don't know it, so we just have it and we're gonna garner this type of power and do whatever we want with it. No, it spread so quickly that there could have been no type of authoritarian dictatorship to say, we got this message, we got this power, and we're going to propagate it to our own ends.
How can I believe in a God that claims he's morally just but sees things like homosexuality and murder as equal?
The Bible never says that homosexuality and murder are equal. The Bible never says that lust and rape are equal. The Bible never says that hatred and murder are equal. What the Bible does say is, all sin separates me from God, be it hatred or murder, be it lust or rape. But the Bible never says that it's just as bad to lust as it is to rape. That is a total misreading of the Bible. Obviously, ethically, in terms of the consequences, it is far worse to rape than it is to lust. But what Jesus in the Bible does insist is, all sin, my lust, the rapist's rape, separates me from God because God is morally perfect, God is holy. The cross of Christ is a clear statement. God takes evil seriously, and forgiveness is not free and easy. Just think about it. If someone hurts you badly enough, if you choose to forgive them, you pay. It costs to forgive. Nobody just gets off scot-free. Someone's got to pay. If I rip a pound of flesh out of you and you forgive me, what you're saying is, Cliff, I refuse to rip a pound of flesh out of you in revenge to equal the account. No, what you're saying when you forgive is, you're saying, I will absorb the hit, I will absorb the hurt. Refusing to wreak havoc in your life and get justice, I will allow God to judge you, because he's all-knowing and he's just, I am not, and I will forgive you, even as God has forgiven me. So watch out. Yes, all sin is equal in that all sin separates me from God. No, all sin is not equal in its ethical consequences, in its practical consequences.
I've come across an argument that's pretty common recently from non-believers saying, like, if God is so good, why does he let bad things happen to good people? How could I combat that?
And where I start with that is, I do not know why God allowed evil and suffering. When my younger brother lost his 7-year-old daughter in a horrible car accident, and I went out to be with him, believe me, I wasn't giving him any answers. Why did the babysitter not see the stop sign, run right through the stop sign? Why was a pickup truck at 55 miles an hour coming down the road, smashing into my niece's car as she sits in her child's seat in the back seat, killing her instantly? Come on, God, the babysitter could have been helped to see the stop sign. You could have done that easily. Why didn't you do it? I do not know. But intellectually now, we got to think. If there is no God, what's so bad about my 7-year-old niece getting killed in a car wreck? It just is. If there is no God, what is, is. And when you start making analytical statements like, that is good and that is evil, all of a sudden you're lapsing into a worldview where God exists. Because if there is no God, it's all matter and energy, baby. And her matter and energy came together and she was born, and her matter and energy fell apart when that pickup truck at 55 miles an hour smashed into the side of the car because the babysitter didn't see the stop sign. That's just the way the ball bounces, friends. What is, is. You know why we can't live that way? Because we're human beings created in the image of God with rational minds and consciences and the ability to make meaningful statements, the ability to understand the difference between good and evil, right and wrong, and the ability to say, that is wrong, that should not have happened. That's what it means to be a human being, not a robot, not a highly sophisticated programmed machine. So I would encourage you to press your atheist friends to be intellectually consistent and not to be intellectual hypocrites. To be intellectually consistent means, if I believe in Jesus Christ, I better not go out and womanize after I finish talking out here about Christ, right? And if you're an atheist, to be intellectually consistent means you better face the despair of life, the meaninglessness of life, the relativity of morality, which means, you know something? It doesn't matter whether I steal his wallet or whether I give him money for lunch. It's all just a choice. And if I choose to feed him lunch, great. And if I choose to steal his wallet, just as great, because it's my choice. And don't you dare tell me that one is better than the other, because that's a qualitative distinction you're making, and it's based on a whole view of goodness and justice. And if you're an atheist, you have to acknowledge those don't exist, because there's no mind prior to the human mind who defines what is good versus what is evil, what is just versus what is unjust. Okay, now does that make any sense?
It does.
Okay, now jam on people. I was speaking at UC Berkeley in a philosophy class, and I was doing to the students what you just heard me doing. The professor was an atheist. This is UC Berkeley, okay? He's a brilliant guy. And the students were really objecting, saying, oh, no. Good and evil can exist apart from any God. Finally, at the end of the class, the professor stands up and says, you guys are all wrong, and Cliffe is right. I don't agree with Cliffe. I'm an atheist. But in terms of, if there is no God, there is no mind prior to the human mind that defines right and wrong. Therefore, morality is totally relative, and for you to make some categorical statement like, oh, the Holocaust was really horrible. No, it's not really horrible. It's horrible from your perspective, and your perspective is totally relative, so be consistent with your worldview. Don't be an intellectual hypocrite and say, there is no God, but racism is wrong. No, if there is no God, racism isn't wrong, neither is rape. No, it just is. Now you know that that's false. How do you know that? From your experience of life. Can you scientifically prove what I just said? No, I cannot scientifically prove that. But I can't scientifically prove that my wife is not just fattening me up to drop arsenic in my tea. She might be doing that. The overwhelming evidence is she's not doing that. And that's why I trust her and I don't chemically analyze the tea that she puts before me as we play Scrabble in the morning. We trust, but not blindly. We trust because of evidence of reliability. Now, I can promise you, if you die and rise from the dead, I'll listen very carefully to everything you have to say. That's why I trust Jesus, because he died and he physically rose from the dead. And if you don't trust him, you're making a big mistake. Why? Because nobody is as credible, as trustworthy as Jesus Christ.
How do you tell which denominations work with the faith base and not just word based?
Yeah.
How do you find common grounds and where's the true message and how do you follow it?
So I would never go with a denomination. There are so many mainline denominations now. Like one guy came from a mainline denomination. He was going to our church and he came up to me and said, I was totally honest, Stuart, in terms of sex ethics and in terms of whether the resurrection actually occurred, I am differing with you now and I have to leave the church, your church. So he was saying, no longer do I believe in a historical resurrection, that Jesus actually rose from the dead. And your sex ethics, a little too stringent. So he went to a mainline denomination. And so many of those are taking that type of liberal theology, which is so sad to me. It's kind of like, well, why be a Christian? Why not just be something else? It's all metaphorical. I mean, come on. There's atheist types of churches now. Why not just do that? Why not the Unitarian Universalist churches, where it's just everything is just truth. And it's your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. Except when you get pulled over by the cops going 80 in a 55, which I got. And imagine if I would have said, when that cop came to my window, I said, oh, you got me for 80? Okay, well, ma'am, police officer, that's your truth. Your truth is your truth that I was going 80. My truth is my truth that I was going 55. So why are you ticketing me right now? Okay, so many different mainline denominations buy into, it's just your truth, man. It's just your truth, my truth, and everything in the Bible is metaphorical. What we want to do is, you guys are in the Bible Belt. Statistically, the majority of you here, if an atheist were to come up to you and say, why are you a Christian? Your response would be, because I just have faith. Okay, I don't know if that's enough. And that's why I'm so proud of each and every one of you here, because you really are trying to get the evidence, think through with your head and your heart, why am I a Christian? And how can I, like the gentleman over here just mentioned, how can I combat this type of thinking, this type of secular thinking, which is more and more pervasive on our society today? So, to find the last point to your good question, we actually align theologically more so than any other denomination in our town and county with the Catholic Church downtown. And why is that? Not because of the minors, whether it's purgatory or praying to Mary or other things. It's because of the majors. This Catholic Church specifically buys into you have to have a relationship with Christ. He was a historical figure. He lived a perfect life, never spoke a word out of turn, and he actually died and rose from the dead. And there were eyewitnesses that spread that message around the known world. Okay, that's what we align with. It's not the other non-denominational church that's down the road, which says that, oh, Jesus was just kind of like any other good philosopher and moral teacher. See, the same non-denominational sect, if you will, but they don't buy into it. That's why I wouldn't go the route of this denomination or that denomination. No, you got to specifically look into the churches themselves.
So I kind of want to turn the logic that you use back onto you.
Good.
Specifically when talking about, you mentioned how Jesus is the most credible figure because he rose from the dead. But why does that make him credible just because he did this alleged supernatural act? Versus if somebody else says, okay, this actually makes a person more credible, like Muhammad or Buddha, a figure like that, and based off of their actions, that's what makes them credible, more credible than Jesus. Like, what will your response be? And I have a second question.
You make your decision. And if you're impressed with how Islam has spread by the sword versus how faith in Christ has spread with the towel, when followers of Christ have killed people in his name, that's a violent contradiction of Christ. Sadly, it's occurred. But when followers of Muhammad have used the sword, they are not contradicting Muhammad. In the Quran, Muhammad writes, live at peace with all people. Then he goes on and says, defend yourself if you're attacked. But then thirdly, he says, kill the infidel. Now, my Muslim friends, I think, have a real dilemma there. They got to decide what's true. But you see, when you study the different options, what you begin to realize is the evidence of his teachings, his lifestyle, the way he treated people, the way he died, loving and forgiving his enemies, and the way he rose from the dead points to Christ being the truth. Now, when someone says to me, well, Cliff, I don't think that the resurrection of Christ is very impressive, I feel like saying, you got to be kidding me. I feel like saying, stop lying to me, stop lying to yourself. Why? Because if you get sick enough, you know where you're headed. Straight to a hospital to get a doctor to get you better. Why? Because you treasure your life. Now, Jesus said, I am the resurrection of the life. Whoever believes in me will live even though they die. That's a very good doctor. The question is he blowing smoke or is he speaking the truth? And his resurrection from the dead is clear evidence. He ain't blowing smoke. He is speaking the truth.
But like from some of the things I've heard,
Yep.
I feel like sometimes there's been some, I don't know, generalities of like equating two things that are like sin from a Christian standpoint,
Right.
As equal. And so I guess my question would be, what would you say to people who weaponize the Bible for means of producing their own agenda or things like that? I mean, we even have people like the Consuming Fire folks who come out here and they scream at people. They, use, just homophobic language and stuff like that, and a lot of hatred. And so, like, what would you say to people who weaponize the Bible for means of passing their own agenda, gaining power, and stuff like that? And because that happens, does that not mess with your faith?
Just because somebody twists Christ, tells you nothing about Christ, it tells you a lot about them. And you as an African American, you know that. Because you have chosen not to allow white Christian racists to turn you off to the true Jesus who did not have a racist bone in his body. So you know that you've got to be clear thinking, you've got to be open-minded, you've got to go to the source document, the Bible, and figure out, did Jesus call for his message to be weaponized to destroy people? No, the opposite. The guy comes up to Jesus and says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, what are the commandments? He says, well, love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, that's right. But in order to justify himself, the guy says, well, Jesus, who's my neighbor? And Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, how a Jew is beaten up and bloodied on the side of the road to Jericho. Two religious guys come walking by, and they don't have time. He's a wreck of grief. Maybe the criminals are behind the tree or rock over there, and they're going to jump you. So they just skirt the hurting guy and keep walking. It's called apathy. I don't care what your situation in life is. And then Jesus said a Samaritan came along, and there was all types of racial tension between Jews and Samaritans in the first century. This Samaritan stops, gets down on his hands and knees, cleans out the cuts, bandages the wound of a Jew. Then he lifts him up, puts him on his beast of burden, brings him to an inn, takes out his wallet, and pays the innkeeper to take care of him. And Jesus looks the guy in the face and says, now you go and do likewise. So, when anybody weaponizes Christianity, and unfortunately you're right, sir, it's been done for 2,000 years, and it's being done today in this country, you don't buy into it. The same way you don't buy into saying that Jesus Christ is a white Messiah, therefore, as a black man, I cannot worship him. No, Jesus Christ is not the white Messiah. Jesus Christ is not the Western God. Right? Far more followers of Jesus outside of the West who don't have white skin than are inside the West and do have white skin. And it is very insulting to say Jesus is a white God, a white Messiah. It's a lie. He was a Jew born in Palestine. And the vast majority of followers of Christ live outside of the West, and they're not white folks. So don't buy into anybody, be they white or black or Hispanic or Asian, who try and weaponize Christianity and use Christ to oppress people, to intimidate people, or to put people down.
But don't use the other side too. See, the cross of Christ is all about justice meeting love, where justice is God's ultimate. There has to be a payment for our sin. And that payment is based on justice. It's all about justice. But then there's also love, because it's Christ sacrificing his life for our sins to make that type of payment. So you're going to have people out here talking all the time about, oh, everybody gets in. It's just love, love, love. Well, you can't have love without justice. I mean, you go to a battered woman, and you say, oh, just love the person who just, the man who just oppressed you. Just love them. Just forgive them. No, you want justice, don't you? But not in every case do you just want justice. Do you just want to say, no, flesh for flesh, pound of flesh for pound of flesh, eye for an eye makes the world go blind. It can't just be justice. It can't just be exactly like you said, a group out here just screaming at people, telling them they're all going to hell. No, that's way too much weight on justice. But then there's also many groups that I see in many churches who it's all about just love. There's no real sin out there. That's a dirty word. Injustice. But then it's so funny. Those people who just preach love, they are so loud oftentimes about certain types of injustice that you see in this world, whether that be through racism or whether that be through killing the planet because we don't care for the planet and animal rights. And so they're so loud, but they say it's all about just love people. No, the cross of Christ brings justice in perfectly with love. And so don't get caught up into the trap of, oh, it's just love, love, love. Love everybody. Your truth is your truth. Mine is mine. Or the trap of, oh, it's just justice and you're a vessel of wrath. God just created you to go to hell. So it's the perfect wedding of the two that you have at the cross, which is hopefully what we're doing out here.
Now, brother, God's given you a good mind. Keep thinking. I love the way you question and think. Keep it going. That's exactly what you got to do. All right? Thanks.
So in this world, like LGBTQ and a lot of things are becoming normalized that
Yes.
don't necessarily align with the Bible, but also like infidelity and all of that thing doesn't
Yeah.
align too. How do I combat somebody coming up to me and say, hey, will you push this movement or whatever? And I disagree and they see it as hatred. But it's
Right.
not necessarily hatred, it's just it's like a disagreement. So how do I combat with saying disagree, agree to disagree, period? So how do I combat those type of thinking?
There are about 6 statements in the Bible that having homosexual relationships is sinful. There are about 354 statements in the Bible that practicing heterosexual immorality is wrong. But God still loves heterosexuals. Okay, what do you think I'm trying to do there? That he loves everyone. That we're not going to take one sin and blow it out of proportion. That we all have feet of clay. We all sin. And I can promise you, I have sinned sexually. Through my heterosexual lust, I am a sinner. So I'm not better than anybody. And I can promise you, if you're going to try and convince me that I hate you because I say that homosexual sex, the practice of it, is wrong, then I guess I hate every adulterer, every fornicator, everybody who's in pornography, and everybody who's into lust like I am. So I guess I hate all of humanity. Give me a break. I love and respect all people. Why? Because a person's value has nothing to do with their sexual practice. Nothing to do with it. A person's value has everything to do with the fact that we are created in the image of God. And guess what? I'm a sexual pervert because I have committed heterosexual lust, which means I have perverted the gift of human sexuality that God has blessed me with. And I'm no different from you, and you're no different from me. So let's get over it. Let's start loving and respecting each other and speaking the truth to each other and holding each other accountable.
I'd like to invite you to Grace Community Church, located at 365 Lukeswood Road in New Canaan, Connecticut. Our services are at 9:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. on Sundays. Hope you can join us.